Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be putting together this epic orchestral cue to come up with an adventure and discovery track. Why would you want to do that? Well, subtlety's overrated really, and there is such a thing as brass. Right, when you look at this and you look at the MIDI notes, you might think, oh my goodness, how am I going to recreate or create a piece like this? Well, let me assure you, actually, a lot of those notes represent percussion hits, so they turn up as MIDI notes, and a lot of them are doubled. So for example, the oboe and bassoon are playing the same notes, but they appear in different octaves. So it looks like there are sort of more notes than maybe have actually been written. Epic orchestral music is just like normal music, apart from the notes wear capes. In this case specifically the brass, we're going to really feature that quite heavily throughout. Now I've used BBCSO Pro for this whole project. I've not used any other instruments or libraries, so you could pick your own favorite orchestral library and try that, or you could even do it with BBCSO Discover and get something close to this effect. And a lot of the time people say, well, there's loads of chords and changes and modulations going on. If you break it down into its constituent parts, it's actually relatively simple. So what I've done for you is I have left in the Albion 1 strings. This is the only bit that I did without BBCSO because it's really quick to compose with the strings section. So I've got shorts and longs. So if we just listen to this, I will put on the screen the different chords that are making up these different sections. So there's a first section, a second, a third, a fourth, and then we go back to the third sequence. So the first sequence, and bear in mind, this is in 4/4 at 120 BPM. You could write it in 6/8, but I've gone for 4/4 and put triplets in. So this is what we've got as the sort of starting place. So ignore everything else. This is what I had to begin with. So this is just A, D, E, and A. Then we repeat that, but we bring in some longs in the background, just holding out A and an E. Into section 2, A, E, F sharp, C sharp, both those minor, D, A, E, and repeat it. Easy way to remember it, it's like a D scale coming down, A, F sharp, D, and adding the fifths. Third section, D, A, E, G, D, E, and repeat that. And at the very end, we repeat the G, D, E, the last three chords here, and build into our breakdown, which is just D and G, C and F, B flat and G, and then ending on the E, which we can then use to build, here we go, back into the third set of chords, D, A, E, G, D, E. It's the same as the first section, except we're going to put more instruments in, including a piccolo, which is going to really stand out. Now, if you haven't listened to the whole track, it might be a good time to do that now, because hearing this in context first will probably make sense as we go through everything else, because I'm going to now hide those Albion 1 strings and we're just going to focus on what's going on in the different sections. So from Albion 1 strings, what I did was then take the chords I was playing in Albion 1 and I broke them out into the separate parts. So a typical way of doing that would be take the top line for violin 1, second line violin 2, and then viola. Now, as I knew I wanted a violin melody line to go along with this, I've mainly put the chords in violin 2, viola and cello, and the basses, when they come in, they just double the cello, so playing exactly the same notes an octave lower to boost the sound. So you can see as we go along, actually more strings come in. We obviously have this breakdown section, and I've also split out into staccato and legato patches for each. So let's look at the cello to start with, the staccato. What I've got is this going on. Then we bring in violin 2 and viola. You can hear the bass staccato now. This is the only time the basses actually do that staccato part, but we've also got violin 1 on the top doing its own melody. Everything's still being driven by that cello staccato. And you can hear how that develops. And what we're doing is using the chords as the basis, the glue underneath, and then putting in these extra top lines for the violin 1s. And then build again. Then we slow everything down here. We're still going at 120, it just feels like the notes are not coming quite as quickly in your face. And that is literally just following the chord pattern. At the end, we do exactly the same with the strings, basically slightly louder as we build towards the end, but it's the same string section as section 3, effectively. There's your strings for you, and that just came from those 2 lines that I originally wrote. Next, we've got this woodwind section. Now, the woodwinds are basically doing an accompaniment. They're doing flourishes and fun stuff. So if we just look at these first few lines here, nice. And literally, the oboe and bassoon are doubling at each other. The flute and the clarinet are doing exactly the same. So we've paired flutes and clarinets and oboes and bassoons. That's actually a pretty typical pairing. When we get to this section, I've actually used the flutes and clarinets to carry a bit more of a melody. The flutes are doing that melody part, and we've got the oboes and bassoons still doing their accented bits, and then we get a bit more flourishy with the flutes and clarinets. And you don't need to overthink it. It's literally just using the chords that we looked at to start with and playing around with arpeggios. That's pretty much it. The only thing we do add at the end is the piccolo that comes in. But what you will find is the piccolo is doing the same as the flutes, another octave higher, which gives us that really piercing sound. And don't be scared by these sort of runs where we are introducing the next note, because you don't play these in, you just use note input down here and press them one at a time. So you get this effect. And what you've got to be careful of, obviously, is if you are doing the flute, legato and staccato, make sure that one doesn't run into the other, because you want it to sound like the same flutes are just changing their articulation. So make sure you don't run one into the other. Okay, that's our woodwind. Next, we've got the notes with capes. So that's basically the brass. Now, we don't hit everybody in the face like John Williams at the start of Star Wars with everything. What we've done here is actually introduce things a little bit subtler. So we've got the trumpet staccatos and some horns and some tenor trombone. A few more notes. And we're now going to longs in the tenor trombone. That just repeats. Then we're going to bring in the horns. Now these really have capes on them. So they're doubled with the trombones. Now we're going to bring in the trumpets on top again. Same notes, just an extra octave. And we've got a bit of a build up. You don't have to overthink what the notes are. Just think of the chords and have a play around. You might need some semitones here and there to come up with a melody, but in general, think of the chord that's playing. We went over those at the beginning, and just have a go at improvising. I like to put a section on repeat, for example, where I've got the chords going, and I'll just set it going, play, improvise, see what sounds good, and eventually when I get something that sounds good, the really good thing about Logic and most other DAWs is they now have a facility where you go, oh, that last one was really cool. In Logic, Shift R, and it remembers what you've just been playing. I love that for an improvising way of going about putting these things together. And at the end, we've just got the staccatos coming in and accenting. Of course, everything else is in at that point as well. Finally, we've got the percussion section. Now, I have actually broken these down when I've done them into stems into tuned percussion, and also separated the timpani, snare and bass on their own, and cymbals as well. Because when you're sending this to a library, it's possible they might want to take one or more of these elements out. And these are just doing fun things, really. So we've got some glissandos and some hits, and they pretty much continue all the way along, a bit like trying to find spaces for your woodwinds. You're trying to find gaps for all the little accidental notes. So this is where a lot of these MIDI notes that you saw in the original score appear, even though they're not necessarily playing a particularly key part. But for example, the violin runs, for example, will stand up as a whole load of different notes. Again, use note input, don't try and play them in. It's nice and easy to just use the facilities that are there. And we've got timpani rolls as well. Let's just unlock those. Now, you can be a bit adventurous here with timpani hits. Now, in a normal orchestra, they don't normally set up every single timpani drum. They just pick a couple of particular notes. Using a DAW, yeah, you can bend the rules a little bit and have them hit the actual chord note as you go. The rolls are quite nice as well, brings everything to a nice end as well. That's literally just using 2 timpanis. We've got the bass and the snare. The snare is just doing a military type rhythm, and the bass drum just hits the first of most of the beats. And then we've got cymbals in as well. So it sounds a bit weird on its own, but I think you get the idea. Okay, that's how we put it all together. You can do exactly the same yourself. You just need an orchestral patch of some form. I hope you found that interesting and not too daunting. I'm going to play it for you again as an outro, because you'll probably be able to see all the little bits that you might not have spotted when we started. Hope you found that fun. See you in the next one. Bye for now.